For the past 11 years, my best friend Mark and I have shared a strong bond that began when we were just 16 years old. We connected over our dreams of pursuing the same career path, sharing both our hopes and struggles along the way. After facing numerous rejections, my career finally began to gain momentum over the past year, while Mark continued to struggle without the same luck. Throughout this time, I invested a great deal of effort into helping him succeed, often encouraging him and trying to lift his spirits. Mark and I even lived together as roommates from the ages of 20 to 23, sharing everything from laughter to challenges. However, about 6 months ago, I noticed a significant change in his attitude towards me. He started making jokes at my expense, saying hurtful and belittling things that began to chip away at my self-esteem. I was typically a happy-go-lucky person, so I tried to brush off his comments, believing they were the result of jealousy and frustration over his own setbacks. I understood how difficult it could be to witness someone else achieving the success you desire in a competitive field. In addition to the tensions with Mark, my romantic life was also a crucial aspect of my happiness. I had been in a wonderful relationship with my girlfriend Emily for 5.5 years. I believed we had the perfect relationship, built on strong communication and a fulfilling sexual connection. Emily stood by my side during the toughest periods of my career, and I made it a priority to keep our relationship exciting and fresh. This involved weekly date nights, surprising her with gifts or trips, and participating in activities that brought us closer. I cherished the moments we shared together and made sure she knew she was my top priority. Last week, our friend group gathered at the home of Tom and Katie, another couple who have been close friends of ours for about 7 years. We were all enjoying each other's company in their yard, sharing drinks and laughter, when I noticed Mark getting drunk quite quickly. As the night went on, he resumed his pattern of taking jabs at me, and after enduring this for 6 months, I finally reached my breaking point and called him out on it. This confrontation escalated into a heated argument where I expressed my belief that his behavior stemmed from jealousy over my recent success. In a moment of frustration, I pointed out that it was not my fault he had not found his own talent, despite my efforts to help him along the way. In a sudden turn of events, Mark attacked me. We exchanged shoves, and then he knocked me down, kicking me in the ribs. When he attempted to stomp on my head, I was lucky that he didn't connect fully. I still felt the force of his foot graze my cheek, causing swelling that lingered afterward. In a panic, I moved just in time when he tried again, and his foot landed dangerously close to my face. If he had hit me directly, the outcome could have been severe, perhaps even fatal. Amidst the chaos, our friends jumped in to separate us. I stood up and yelled at Mark, questioning his sanity as his demeanor shifted, appearing to walk away from the situation. However, he then picked up a wooden plank from the yard, where Tom and Katie were currently working on their fence and shed. In a moment of aggression, he lunged at me with the plank, and I had to duck and raise my arm to protect myself. The plank hit my elbow instead of my head, but it was clear that he was still a threat. This reckless swing also nearly hit Jane, who was standing nearby. In that moment, everything erupted into chaos. Tom and Bill, witnessing what had just happened, jumped on Mark and started beating him up in a fit of rage. The girls, in a frantic effort to stop the escalating violence, managed to pull Tom and Bill off Mark. The scene was filled with emotional turmoil, and we all stood in shock at the sudden and violent turn of events. Mark, bruised and bloodied, sat on the ground, and Emily came over to sit with him. Despite the blood covering his face, he remained conscious. Katie quickly made arrangements to drive him to the hospital, and she returned the following morning with the news that Mark had suffered a broken nose and a slight concussion. She mentioned that he hadn't spoken much to her during the ride home or offered any explanation or apology for his actions. This entire experience left all of us deeply shaken and unsure of how to move forward in our friendships. That night, as we all sat there trying to process what had happened, none of us managed to get any sleep. The events of the evening left us in a state of shock, heightened by alcohol and an unmistakable adrenaline rush. I can hardly recall the details, as the memories are hazy and mixed with the overwhelming emotions I was feeling. It was, without a doubt, one of the worst nights of my life, and it seemed like things were only going to get worse from there. You might have noticed I haven't mentioned Emily in a while. As we were sitting together, Tom made a comment that stuck with me. He said that Mark deserved worse than just a broken nose for trying to hurt him not just once, but twice, and for almost hurting Jane as well. Out of nowhere, Emily, who had been quiet up to that point, erupted in defense of Mark. She insisted that he didn't deserve any of this and that he had simply been going through a tough time. This sparked a heated argument between Tom and Emily, which quickly escalated into a near-screaming match. Frustrated, Emily stormed off, and I instinctively followed her, hoping to comfort her in our shared shock and sleep deprivation. I found her in the guest room, tears streaming down her face. When I approached, I gently told her that I understood how she felt and suggested that maybe we should try to get some sleep. To my surprise, she didn't even look at me. In that moment, a realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The night before, Mark and Emily had been sitting right next to each other. It wasn't the first time Mark had yelled at me, and yet there was Emily, pleading with him to take a walk and calm down instead of checking on me. After Mark had kicked me, stomped on me, and even swung a plank at me, her focus remained on trying to soothe him. I was left on the ground in pain, and it struck me that she hadn't even bothered to ask if I was okay throughout the entire ordeal. Overwhelmed by the thoughts racing in my mind, I blurted out a question that had been gnawing at me: "Are you cheating on me with Mark?" Her reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. She broke down, crying uncontrollably and repeating that she never intended for things to spiral this out of control. In that moment, I understood the truth I had been dreading, and fury took over me. I started shouting, demanding to know what was happening and how she could betray me like this. The others, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room and pulled me away to try to calm me down. In the aftermath, Jane and Katie decided to take Emily to her parents' house, concerned for her well-being. During the car ride, Emily cried so much that she could barely speak. By the time they arrived at her parents' home, she was in such a state that both Jane and her father had to help her up the stairs and into bed. She was still in hysterics, and the only words that escaped her were a desperate cry that she had ruined everything. Jane stayed behind with Emily because her parents were understandably worried about her condition, having never seen her like this before. Jane and Katie explained to Emily's parents what had happened between Mark and me, and it became clear that much of Emily's distress stemmed from her involvement with Mark. 5 days passed, and during that time, I was engulfed in a storm of physical and emotional pain. I was angry, confused, and feeling the toll the situation had taken on my body. I had a fractured elbow, bruised ribs, and my face was swollen from the fight. The events of that night replayed in my mind on a loop, making it nearly impossible to find any peace. I reached out to Emily through text messages, hoping for some clarity, but there was no response. Then, this morning, I received a call from my former in-laws, who had always been kind to me. They expressed their apologies for Emily's actions and were genuinely understanding of the situation. My former mother-in-law mentioned that Emily wanted to see me and talk things over, and I agreed to come over. When I arrived, they informed me that they would give us some space and waited outside in their car, but remained on the property to ensure Emily's safety. As I walked in, seeing Emily was like riding an emotional roller coaster. I felt anger and bitterness bubbling up inside me, but there was also a deep sense of sympathy. She looked absolutely dreadful, as if she hadn't eaten, showered, or slept since that terrible night. My heart ached for her, but I had to restrain the urge to rush over and pull her into my arms. Instead, I took a seat facing her, trying to keep my emotions in check. Emily, with tears still in her eyes, told me I could ask her anything, assuring me that she would be honest. She kept apologizing and mentioning how she felt she had ruined everyone's lives. To keep this from getting too lengthy, I won't go into all the details, but essentially, it came out that a year ago, Mark had confessed his love for Emily and had been persistently pursuing her ever since. She tried to make it clear that her feelings were not mutual, but I couldn't help but wonder why she hadn't come to me sooner. I asked her why she didn't come to me when things started getting complicated. She replied that she was worried about ruining our friendship and that her intention was to fix the problems instead. However, in the past few months, Mark had become more aggressive in his pursuit of her, even pressuring her to leave me for him. When I asked her if anything significant had occurred between them, she admitted that they had kissed twice, but she quickly stopped it each time. There was also an instance when they cuddled while watching a movie, during which Mark attempted to initiate sex. She left the situation and made it clear that she had boundaries. Curiously, I inquired why she continued to meet him alone, especially since he was constantly attempting to kiss her and get her into bed. Her response was that Mark always promised he wouldn't do it again. I pressed further, asking why she hadn't cut contact entirely. Why did she keep replying to his direct messages and meeting with him, essentially giving him false hope and leading him on? She mentioned something that was unexpected. She felt sorry for him, like she was his big sister who needed to look out for him. She believed she needed to help him move on from her, even going as far as to set him up on a date with a friend, which he ruined by treating the girl poorly. I challenged her, asking if she was being foolish and if she was really telling the truth. It seemed to me like she was keeping his hopes alive by spending time with him. She became emotional, crying, and insisted that her relationship with Mark was more like a sibling bond. She wanted to fix everything because she thought he was struggling and needed support to get back on his feet. But the situation escalated when he began speaking poorly of me, claiming I didn't deserve her. She expressed regret over everything that had happened, admitting she felt foolish for handling things in the worst way possible. She believed she acted with good intentions but failed to see that her actions were only making matters worse. I then asked if she had contacted him since that night, and she hesitated for a moment before breaking down in tears, admitting that she had. This revelation was devastating for me. For over a year, this man had been trying to come between us, and after waiting for her response for 5 long days, I found out through her mother that she was still texting him. I felt betrayed and hurt. It wasn't physical pain I wanted to inflict but emotional anguish, so I decided to leave. She followed me, pleading for a chance to explain further. At that moment, her parents got out of the car, inquiring if everything was okay. Unable to control my emotions, I yelled in frustration about how their daughter's choices had destroyed my life, questioning how she could choose someone who had tried to harm me over me. Anger consumed me, and I couldn't even drive. I simply began walking away. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually, her ex drove beside me and offered me a ride. I expected him to scold me for what had happened, but, to my surprise, he just took me home silently. When we arrived at my place, he gently placed his hand on my shoulder. I was incapable of looking him in the eye after everything that had transpired. After that, Emily sent me screenshots of her conversations with Mark. These texts seemed to support her claim that she only checked on his well-being and eventually told him she couldn't keep him in her life. She stated she would never forgive him for his actions against me. Additionally, she forwarded more conversations where she rejected his advances and clearly told him she had no feelings for him. However, since they had spoken for over a year, I was aware she could have selected only certain messages to make herself look better while omitting others. At this moment, I have yet to respond to her and feel uncertain if I ever will. I plan to block her, but for reasons I cannot fully explain, I haven't done so yet. Right now, I just need to express what I'm feeling. The sense of betrayal and anger is overwhelming. Feelings of betrayal and anger can be overwhelming. The sense of being deceived by people you thought you could trust hits hard. In this case, the emotions directed toward Emily and Mark are intense. There is a deep desire to make them feel the same pain that has been inflicted, not through violence, but in a way that reflects the emotional turmoil felt. Acknowledging that this desire isn't healthy is an important step in processing these feelings. Writing about the situation, even if no one else reads it, may provide some relief and a way to start understanding what has happened and how life has shifted dramatically from a sense of happiness to a pervasive feeling of despair. There is a fear that this pain will linger indefinitely, leading to the belief that recovery may never happen. The emotional connection once shared with loved ones now feels tainted by hatred, creating a painful contradiction of love and resentment. Although Emily has claimed she did not cheat in a physical sense, doubts linger. The betrayal felt isn't limited to physical actions, it extends far beyond, affecting trust and emotional safety. Mark's actions, along with Emily's, contributed to a deep sense of injury that seems impossible to forgive. The idea of ever reaching a point of forgiveness or healing feels distant, almost unreachable. The plea for guidance and advice resonates deeply with anyone who has experienced similar betrayals from partners or friends. The struggle to move forward and find a way to live life again is a common concern. It's vital to consider the next steps in this difficult journey of healing. In an update, the need for reassurance and advice becomes even more pronounced. As many have inquired about how things have progressed, it becomes necessary to share the latest developments. The situation remains complex and the details are intricate, yet brevity is key to avoid overwhelming those looking to offer support. The discussion around pressing charges has stirred mixed emotions and confusion. The disparity between expectations and reality regarding the justice system can be disheartening. Two different lawyers have provided clarity, suggesting pressing charges is possible but may not lead to the outcomes hoped for. The likelihood of a severe legal consequence seems slim, often reduced to financial penalties rather than significant punitive measures. The thoughts of lengthy legal battles loom, accompanied by the desire for a resolution without prolonged distraction. Mark's reputation has taken a hit, with shifts in his relationships. Friends have chosen to remain neutral while some expressed disappointment in his actions. His younger sister, who once saw him as an admirable figure, is now grappling with her feelings towards him and the situation as a whole. The apology letter from Mark seems sincere in acknowledging his behavior but lacks a heartfelt acknowledgement of the depth of the betrayal. Despite the apology, the decision to remain unresponsive is firm. There is also a realization that others, like Jane and Katie, may have insights about Emily's experience with Mark that were not previously disclosed. The defensive nature of their responses raises questions about how much they really knew about the situation. In navigating these complexities, the focus remains on processing emotions, understanding the impact of betrayal, and seeking a path toward healing. I found it hard to accept that Jane and others around her only knew the surface details of what had happened. When I brought it up with Jane, she became very defensive, which only added to my concerns. This led to a ripple effect, as Tom became upset with her for not being open about the situation. He started to wonder what else she might be hiding if she could keep a secret like this. This tension caused a strain in their relationship, even though I tried to remain neutral in the midst of it all. I made it clear to Tom that he shouldn't take his anger out on Jane for my situation. Kate later visited me and requested a conversation. During our chat, she insisted that she genuinely didn't know the full story. She mentioned that she had stumbled upon a discussion about the kissing incident between Jane and Emily, but it seemed as though Jane had downplayed the matter afterward. When I asked Jane about it later, she assured me that Emily had dealt with the problem, claiming she thought Emily had told me everything. In that moment, she insisted she was unaware of any other details. I believed Kate's sincerity. She appeared truly remorseful, especially when compared to Jane's reaction. While I didn't harbor any hatred or deep resentment toward Jane, I did feel a strong sense of disappointment and frustration with her actions, which led me to keep my distance from her in the weeks that followed. This decision had a slight effect on my friendship with Tom, as I began spending more time with other friends like Emily. Many of my peers advised me to go no contact with Jane and the situation at large. However, I knew that would have driven me crazy since I needed to express my feelings and seek some closure regarding the events that had unfolded. One individual reached out to me, sharing how he was taught to confront problems face to face, and that perspective resonated with me more than the idea of cutting off all communication. Still, I considered doing so after I spoke with her again because I had other matters to attend to, including apologizing to her parents and retrieving my car, which was still at their place. For days after the incident, I contacted Jane's parents, asking if I could come over to talk. I also requested the opportunity to speak with Emily again. To my surprise, they were relieved to hear from me. Part of me wondered if they thought I was going in to forgive Emily, but I had other intentions. Once I arrived, we engaged in a conversation, and I expressed my apologies for my outburst. Jane's parents expressed their disappointment and shock over my hurtful remarks but acknowledged that I was going through a lot of emotions at the time. After we spoke, we shared a hug, and they stepped outside while I remained in the living room to have a conversation with Emily. As Emily approached me, her expression was filled with sadness, and she asked for a hug. I declined and instead asked her to sit down so we could talk. I requested that she recount the entire story once more and asked if Mark had ever been abusive toward her, as both Jane and Kate had suggested. Emily repeated her previous account but added some new details. She mentioned that she hadn't fully grasped the situation at the time, believing it was her responsibility to address the issue. The main reason she couldn't come clean was that Mark had threatened her, claiming he would expose their kiss to me and say that she was in love with him, thus ruining our relationship. When she tried to cut ties with him, she felt trapped and believed that I would side with him over her. I probed further, asking if Mark had ever been physically abusive. After a brief hesitation, she confessed that it wasn't as severe, but there were 2 occasions when he had caused her pain. She recounted one instance at an event we all attended, where he had pulled her aside and asked if she truly didn't love him. When she responded negatively and tried to walk away, he had grabbed her wrists tightly, causing her discomfort. I remembered that night when Emily seemed distant and uninterested midway through the event, but she had claimed she was just tired. The second instance involved Mark squeezing her bicep in a way that left bruises. I couldn't recall seeing any bruises on her during that time, but perhaps she had concealed them. I also questioned whether there were any sexual undertones to their relationship, as his intentions seemed clear. I asked her why she continued to put herself in a position where these situations could occur. Emily responded that she didn't know and admitted she had made some foolish choices, but she insisted that they never had sexual relations. I pressed her further, asking why Mark had such control over her, allowing him to dominate her thoughts and actions for an entire year without her finding a way to escape his grasp. For an entire year, she struggled to find the courage to explain why she thought I would trust his words over hers again. When she finally spoke about it, she admitted she didn't really understand herself. She mentioned how she kept making one mistake after another. I wanted to know why she chose to ignore me after Mark had attacked me but not him. In response, she broke down in tears, repeating that she didn't know why it happened that way. She had believed that our relationship was strong enough to survive that challenge, and that we would be able to bounce back. She also expressed her worries about what Mark might do next. It was at that moment that I told her how much that hurt me. It felt like she was more concerned about him than she was about me, and to me, it felt like she had made a choice to prioritize him over our relationship. She insisted that she did not choose him, but I held firm to my belief because that was how it seemed to me. I took the time to explain how deeply hurt I was by her actions and how much both she and he had damaged my trust in them. With that trust shattered, I knew we were at the end, and I decided to cut off all contact with both of them. She then asked if there was any chance we could reconnect in the future, and I firmly said no. However, inside, I felt like a storm was brewing. There were so many aspects of her story that I doubted, leading me to reach out to Sarah, who is 27 and Emily's best friend. In my message, I expressed how devastated I felt and how it seemed like everyone around me was being dishonest. To my surprise, Sarah responded quickly. It turned out that she was aware of many details, but Emily had kept her in the dark about a lot of what was going on. Sarah informed me that she had urged Emily to stop talking to Mark and to share his problematic behavior with me. She knew about the kisses shared between them and mentioned that Emily regretted it deeply, stating that she was the one who made sure things didn't go any further. Sarah explained that Emily had initially felt validated by the support she could offer when I was struggling with my career and facing numerous rejections. While I was never completely dependent on her, she often took the role of my support system, cheering me up during hard times and encouraging me to believe in myself. But when my career began to improve, that sense of being needed diminished for her. With Mark now in a place of struggle, Emily found herself giving him the same support she once provided to me, seeking that validation once again. This revelation left me shocked. Sarah was equally taken aback when Emily confided in her. I then asked Sarah if it was possible that Emily felt validated by Mark's sexual attraction toward her. While Sarah noted that Emily rarely discussed that aspect, she suspected, from her knowledge of Emily over the past 2 decades, that it likely played a role as well. As our conversation continued, I found myself grappling with the fear that I might have been deluding myself about being a good boyfriend. I asked Sarah if Emily had ever spoken poorly about me, wondering if I had somehow pushed her into Mark's arms. Sarah reassured me that, in fact, Emily always seemed very much in love and often shared how happy I made her feel. At times, this happiness even made Sarah feel a twinge of jealousy. Emily had occasionally described me as clingy or overbearing, but according to Sarah, the issues were never severe. Since then, I noticed that Sarah had been behaving differently toward me. She started texting me daily, first asking about my day and how I was feeling, and then sending memes, some of which had a somewhat flirtatious edge. I had no interest in pursuing anything with her, so I knew I needed to set boundaries to prevent any misunderstandings. I didn't want her to think I was leading her on. As I wrestled with these emotions and tried to find a way to move on, something unexpected happened. About 8 or 9 days ago, I received a text from Emily. I had blocked her on all social media platforms and messaging apps, relying almost exclusively on those channels for our communication. I had completely forgotten that we could still communicate through our phone numbers, or perhaps I had subconsciously chosen to ignore that possibility. Her message simply asked how I had been. In her follow-up, she shared that she had smiled and laughed for the first time in a long while because of me, attaching a photo of me on her TV. She expressed how proud she was of my achievements and mentioned that she looked forward to seeing my career continue to grow. I work in the entertainment industry, and after landing a behind-the-scenes job early last year, I had gradually started getting in front of the camera. While I am not famous, my little show has been growing in both audience and popularity since we started. I realized my mistake when I responded to her message, and we ended up chatting. Responding to her message was a choice I now regret. For 2 days, we engaged in conversations, not about us, but rather about various political issues that were affecting our country. I maintained a distance between us, choosing to wait until I was in the right mood to reply whenever she reached out. Sometimes I would even finish my current tasks before responding. During our chats, she eventually asked if I could find it within myself to allow her back into my life, even in a small capacity for the future. I told her that I needed more time, but I also made it clear that it was unlikely I could do that. I explained that continuing this back and forth was not good for my mental health. I said goodbye to her and decided to block her once again, thinking that this was the end of our interactions. However, last Friday night, around midnight, everything changed. I heard a knock on my door, and when I opened it, I was shocked to see Emily standing there, drenched from the rain, looking like a scene straight out of a movie. I immediately asked her what she was doing at my place in such a state. She explained that she had been out drinking with friends but felt anxious and wanted to see me. As soon as she got out of the taxi, she got cold feet and ended up standing there for about 10 minutes, but it was too chilly for her to wait for another ride. I couldn't just leave her out in the rain, so I let her in. I quickly gave her some old sweatpants, a t-shirt, and a hoodie to wear while I found a bag for her to put her wet clothes in. Then she told me about her night out with her girlfriend's friends, who had pressured her into going out for a girls' night. She wasn't really feeling ready for it, but she went along anyhow. They started drinking, and she ordered her favorite cocktail, which reminded her of the times we spent together. When we were in a relationship, we had a fun habit of messaging each other throughout the night to share funny experiences, inside jokes, and pictures of our drinks, always trying to outdo each other with something fancier. We were that annoying couple who couldn't stop talking, even when we were apart. In an instinctive act, Emily reached for her phone to send me a picture, only to remember that we could no longer do that. This realization washed over her and brought a wave of sadness. After having a few more drinks, she told me her friends had invited some guys over, despite her telling them she was not interested in meeting or talking to men. One of the guys began flirting with her, and her friends kept putting them together in situations where they were alone. This seemed to frustrate her, and she described the guy as boring, uninteresting, and even ugly. Emily rarely speaks negatively about people, which made me take notice. This moment brought me to a significant realization. I knew a sober Emily, a tipsy Emily, and even a drunk Emily, but the version of her sitting in my living room felt different. She appeared to be in a tipsy drunk state, yet she was acting cold and distant. Unlike the bubbly, giggly Emily I was used to, she avoided eye contact and her voice seemed almost monotone. I couldn't recall a time when she had seemed so disconnected. As I sat there, tired and confused, the silence became heavy. Eventually, I decided to order her a taxi, but after waiting 15 minutes, the app showed it was still searching for a ride. Frustrated and sensing that she maybe just wanted to stay longer, I offered to drive her home since I had a hunch that staying over was on her mind. Without arguing or expressing any protest, she gathered her belongings and walked to my car. However, the mood during the drive was still strange and awkward. When she asked to pick the music, I obliged, and then she requested to hold my hand for what she called one last time. Stupidly, I said yes, but she continued to gaze out the window, never acknowledging me. I attempted to break the tension by joking about taking her back to her friends, but the humor fell flat. She shrugged, stating she was done with men forever, describing how they had always abused her trust, manipulated her emotions, and pushed her into uncomfortable situations. I was uncertain if her comments were directed at me or if she was just venting about her experiences. When I asked her to elaborate on her feelings, she shrugged again, insisting she was serious. In the midst of all this, she shared that Mark had sent her a letter suggesting she move with him to another country, but she told me she had thrown it away. The conversation then faded into silence as we drove. As we neared her parents' house, I felt her squeeze my hand tightly, as if she didn't want to let go. When I stopped the car, she still didn't say anything, and the weight of the moment hung heavily in the air. She didn't say a word when she left my place, she simply walked out without even glancing back at me. It felt as though she was in her own world as she stepped inside. When I finally made it back home, I discovered something that added another layer to my confusion. I found her underwear in my bathroom. They were placed right next to the laundry basket, where clothes often end up when people are in a hurry. My mind raced with the idea that she must have left them there on purpose. After all, she knows that clothes have a tendency to fall, so it couldn't have been by accident. This simple finding now became another thing for me to think about, overanalyzing every detail and doubting everything about our situation. Now I had her underwear, while she had some of my clothes, providing us with yet another excuse to meet again. I felt lost in this mess of emotions. To be honest, I was deeply worried about Emily. The way she behaved that night was so out of character for her that I even started to wonder if she might have been on drugs. I contemplated reaching out to Sarah to ask if she knew anything, but that didn't feel right. I didn't want to put Sarah in an awkward position or put a strain on their relationship. In a moment of naivete, I unblocked Emily on all my social media accounts, hopeful that she might reach out with an apology for showing up drunk at my apartment. The Emily I used to know would have done that. However, I noticed that she had made significant changes to her Instagram account. She removed her bio, deleted almost every picture from her once cute and quirky feed, and kept only 2 old pictures. All the photos that included other people, as well as most of the ones with me, were gone, except for one picture of us from a holiday 2 years ago, which we both considered the most fun time we ever had together. This glance at her profile gave me a glimmer of hope that we were making some tiny progress, but I couldn't shake the feeling of missing her terribly. Emily is truly one of a kind, and I've always felt fortunate to have her in my life. Despite the resentment I harbor for how things have unfolded over the past month, seeing her on Friday, especially when she cried in front of her parents, broke my heart. I had convinced myself that it might be satisfying to watch her suffer for the pain she caused me, particularly with her choices involving Mark. But now, I found that I was simply worried for her well-being. That moment when she squeezed my hand in the car brought back a rush of feelings, making my stomach flutter with memories of our time together. Yet, this joy quickly turned into dread. I didn't want her to spiral into self-destruction or carry shame for the rest of her life. We all make mistakes, none of us are perfect. The more I thought about Mark, the more I suspected he might have been abusive towards her. This realization made me feel a strong urge to take action against him for what he did to Emily. I knew she felt trapped by his threats and the fear of losing everything she had. However, there was a confusing twist to my feelings. While she was there for Mark when their situation escalated, she hadn't been there for me. I found myself going in circles, where I started to wonder if her visit on Friday was a form of manipulation. It felt strange that she showed up so drenched, leaving her underwear behind, acting in such an odd way. But then, for a few moments, my focus shifted, and all I could think about was the possibility of having her back in my life as a partner. Now, I was at a crossroads, contemplating whether to go no contact and try to stay strong or to reach out to her for an honest conversation. Maybe we could lay everything out on the table, working through our issues and seeing if there was a way to move forward together. On the other hand, I also thought about the option of ending things in a way that could lift some of her guilt. That way, she wouldn't have to carry that burden forever. I found myself questioning whether I could downplay my feelings just to ease her pain. As you can see, I'm caught in a whirlwind of confusion and uncertainty. I'm hoping that, like before, someone might offer advice that could help me navigate through this chaos and find the right path ahead.